North Korea is maybe the greatest reminder to all of humanity. This is what it becomes when you stop fighting for free market and individual freedom and free speech. Because North Korea does not have any of those things. And they believe in this ideology called socialism. And that's what it becomes of us when we do fight for certain ideologies.
Tell us a bit, Yeonmi, about growing up in North Korea, some of what you saw and you experienced.
Yeah, I often have to share my story growing up in North Korea, and I always have this difficulty describing the life there because in some sense, life in North Korea is almost like life in a different planet. The very first thing I do remember that I learned from my own mother was she told me, don't even whisper because the birds and mice could hear me. She said the most dangerous thing that I had in my body was my tongue. If I said one wrong word that was not approved by the government, it was going to kill up to 8 generations of my family life.
And Yeonmi, you're at the point in North Korea growing up in horrible conditions where you write about, in While Time Remains, your great books, you've written 2 bestsellers, you write about how you and your sister had to resort to eating insects for food. That's how bad it got.
Yeah, it's growing up in North Korea, I did not even know what, cheeseburger was or pizza was. The fanciest meal that I could have afforded at the time was, eating grasshoppers or dragonflies. That was the only way I could get a source of protein. At one time, I remember while I was playing with my friends growing up there, a lot of boys would catch cockroaches because they were so faster than me. And they would open the cockroach stomach, and inside there, it was something looks like brown rice in it. Then boys would pop that in their mouth. So, it wasn't something that I thought it was a sad thing. Literally, I thought that's how everybody lives.
Obviously, you had this starvation, you had mass poverty, horrific conditions on that end. But in school in North Korea, could you talk about the indoctrination that was just hammered into you, number one, about the United States and about the West, but number two, the North Korean leadership, the regime, they were treated almost as godlike figures, right?
Yeah, it's, the socialists, the first thing they do when they take the control, they get rid of religion, any kind of religion, because they want to be God themselves. The North Koreans are not allowed to learn any other religion other than the Kim dictators. And they literally brainwash us to believe that they are gods who could perform miracles. It's in some sense they copy the Bible. But besides that, other than this, indoctrination of believing Kims are gods, but also demonizing Americans. So even when they had to teach this numbers, it was an opportunity for them to brainwash us and make us believe that Americans were evils that deserve to be killed.
So your view of the United States, needless to say, Yeonmi, was a very, very negative one. America was the enemy. America was evil. And not only that, God did not exist. And this is what you were brought up in. But eventually, and you write about this in your great books, eventually your family is able to escape North Korea. Your sister first, later you and your mother. Talk about how that all went down.
Simply, I was living in the border town of North Korea. And at nighttime, I saw lights. There's this electricity coming from across the river. And that's how I guessed maybe if I go where the lights are, I might be able to find a bowl of rice. So with that curiosity, with my mother and I crossed that frozen Yalu River when I was 13 years old. As soon as I got to the Chinese riverbank, the first thing I saw was my mom being raped. And they told us that they were selling us as sex slaves in China. And so escaping from famine in North Korea, I went to sex slavery at 13.
You're in this horrible situation. You escape North Korea. You think maybe you're in the clear, and now you're in sex slavery. How did you get out of that horrible situation?
I would say it had to be a miracle. There are more than 300,000 North Korean defectors in China right now, currently trapped and being sold like, pigs and being butchered. Their organs are harvested out of them. They get sold as sex slaves like I was. After 2 years of my slavery, when I was 15 years old in 2009, my mother and I met a Christian missionary came from South Korea. They were risking their lives and rescuing North Korean defectors. And they told us that there was a way out of that situation, which meant we had to walk across frozen Gobi Desert into Mongolia. If we don't get from the cold or die from the border guards from Mongolia, they would be able to help us to go to South Korea and become a refugee. So luckily, we saw a miracle. I didn't die in the Gobi Desert. And in 2009, when I was almost turning 16, I didn't make it to South Korea.
It really is as bad as we hear in North Korea, right? And if, God forbid, you had been caught in North Korea, what would have happened to you and your mom, your sister? What would your fate have been?
It's not just as bad as what we, express it to be. It is actually a lot worse than what human language can describe. Human condition can be so horrible. There's no way the words that we use can describe that situation. If I were caught in China or even in North Korea, if the government found out that I was trying to escape, they would put us on the firing squad or send us to concentration camp. But in the concentration camp, the average life expectancy is not even 3 months.
The mental, the physical anguish that you go through. And I truly believe you're talking about it a second ago, Yeonmi, but God has spared your life so that you can be a witness to these horrors, not only for the people of North Korea, but for the people of the West and your new home, the United States, where you're seeing, and you've been here now for several years, but you are seeing some very troubling signs right here in America, land of the free, home of the brave, that remind you of North Korea, communism, socialism. Let's back up first. We want to dig into that. Your great book, While Time Remains, and the title says it all. But you come to the United States, you escape hell on earth, and you wind up at one of our elite institutions, Columbia University, Ivy League. You think this is going to be an incredible experience, and yet it wasn't all that you expected.
When I got there, I could not believe what was happening. The ideologies that being promoted on campus were the exact same ideology that was being promoted by North Korean regime. It's like they say, the capitalism is evil because it creates inequality. I mean, what do you mean there is such a thing called inequality? They say billionaires are evil because nobody makes a billionaire, they steal $1 billion. I'm like, the kids who have this fancy iPhones in their hands. And Steve Jobs didn't come and steal their money. They voluntarily went and bought that phone with their own money, right? Mm-hmm. It's this money being created in capitalism through innovation, by enrichment, not by stealing like the dictators do. And also how much they hate this private property. They say, we should be all equal. Government should come and take care of everybody equally, which is the same ideology that drove North Korea into what it is today. Yeah. And that's when I realized this country is a really, dangerous path. I cannot even empathize to people what it becomes like when we stop believing individual liberty. North Korea is maybe the greatest reminder to all of humanity. This is what it becomes when you stop fighting for free market and individual freedom and free speech. Because North Korea does not have any of those things. And they believe in this ideology called socialism. And that's what it becomes of us when we do fight for certain ideologies.
Yeonmi, this had to shock you, especially at a place like Columbia University, which in prior years at least had such a great reputation. And you talk about this in your great book, While Time Remains. You spoke up, and you spoke up in class. What was the reaction from fellow students, from professors who were espousing a socialist ideology, the kind of ideology that you escaped? What was their reaction when a defector from North Korea spoke out against them in class?
I remember in my senior seminar class, professor was saying, there's no difference between men and women. If I feel like a man, I can be a man. And I was told, in some sense, I thought this is even more crazier than North Korea. North Korea even go this far, right? They maybe went as far as let's do collectivism. Let's do get rid of private property, but they never went to this far to the point where there's no such a thing called men and women. And they still believe in some certain biology in North Korea.
Yeah.
So I asked my professor, I thought, I don't think I can be a man. I think there's a clear physical difference between men and women. And she just told me, you're brainwashed because I'm from North Korea.
Wow.
So, I mean, how else can you add there? Like she was saying, I'm brainwashed. So, and then we had a very strict code where something called we had to respect safe space. It's not about physical safety, but emotional safety, where we cannot offend anybody with our words, So if I did offend somebody, trigger somebody, I could literally get kicked out of university. So the consequences were so big. I just gave up and I did my 4 years and got graduated. And I regret, I will never send my son to Columbia ever.
In your mind and seeing what you've seen, the two tickets here, Republican, Democrat, how large does this election loom in the future direction of the United States? Will we drift into socialism, or will we maintain faith, family, freedom, the kind of values that made this country great? Is this a turning point? No pun intended. You do great work for Turning Point with Charlie Kirk. But is this a turning point for our nation, this election in November 2024? Could it decide the course of the United States?
I mean, the turning point was already, I think, 4 years ago. I mean, since then, how many mobs we have imported to this country, right? Yeah. I think as we keep going on these policies where complete invasion is happening. I live in New York City. I do not recognize this city. I came to America in 2016, January, to study at Columbia when Trump was at the office at the time. And now under Biden, this is a different country. Yeah. That's how quickly a nation can decline. Literally, my life is depending on it. My son's future is depending on it. We have to fight like hell in this election this time.
Yeah. America is pretty much the last beacon right now in the world, Yeonmi, in the Western world for sure. You mentioned earlier the removal of God right away. When communist, socialist dictatorships, regimes come to power, they remove God. You've seen in North Korea, obviously, the absence of God in a society. How big of a role does that play in the downfall of a society?
When you believe in nothing, you believe in everything. That's how you become believing that man can be a woman. In some sense, it's not I'm advocating for a certain religion, but when there's no freedom to have a different beliefs, that society becomes like North Korea or China. And not only that, it just say, what country do we know that is been doing well? Like, I think it's a godless society is the most dangerous society I've ever seen. So, the religious freedom of religion is like the fundamental thing for humanity to prosper with.
Yeah. After all you've been through, what comes next?
It's been my life mission to expose CCP. As I had mentioned, when my first book came out, it was a international bestseller. Mm-hmm. And my book was picked by Hollywood studio to become a movie. But when I got the script from this Hollywood studio, is that the promised land was China. China gave me protection and refugee. And that's when I realized how many institutions are captured by CCP and lying to American people. The greatest threat that humanity is facing is not climate change. It's actually CCP right now. They are doing so much damage to American health. Like, we see the drugs that are pumping into this country. We are losing more than 100,000 lives each year from that. And they are doing everything to destroy America and our prosperity. It's not that North Korea's future is only laced with CCP, but our future too. And we do need to hold them accountable. We do need to expose them. And so our politicians stop selling our country to CCP leaders. It's such an embarrassment and such a heartbreaking thing to see all these corporations and our leaders in DC for just their personal gain are willing to give up this country.
Other than our threats within the porous southern border, the looming threat of China is perhaps our greatest foe in the years to come, the greatest threat posed to the United States.
Definitely. I mean, they are embedded in our education, in our media, in our news, in our politics, in our business, everywhere. China influences everywhere. And their agenda is not for American prosperity. It is the destruction of America.
Wow. Infiltration at all levels. Yeonmi, thank you for everything you're doing, for shining a light on this and many other evils and working to preserve the values that made this country great while time remains. Incredible book, must read for such a time as this. Yeonmi Park, we can't thank you enough for sharing your story. Thanks for all you're doing. God bless you, Yeonmi. We'll see you again soon. Stakelbeck Tonight, my all-new nightly series on current events through a bold biblical lens. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching, and God bless.